Hola y bienvenido amigos de nuevo a otra edición de la revista de vinos y licores de Doc G, also known as Hello again friends, and welcome to another edition of Doc G's Wine and Spirits Review. As you can tell by that brief introduction, we are going to spend a little time tonight talking about wines and spirits from the great country of Spain, España. It's a special love to me, and I'll explain that again. But before we do that, let me take a sip. Bienvenido, welcome. In my glass is the quintessential combination of the best that Spain has to offer. This drink, if you remember from episodes from last year, when I introduced Albarino to you, and I also introduced to you some of my favorite gins, one of them being a gin from Galicia, or Galicia, as they say in Spain, called Nordés. This drink, this cocktail, is a blend of some of that gin, some tonic water, and some great Albarino. It is called a Nordesino, or from the north, because that's where this wine and gin both originate from, the northwest corner of Spain. But more about that later. This is going to be my beverage, my hydration, during our presentation here tonight on Spain. And Spain, my connection to Spain is long and deep. Just a little personal disclosure here. One of the things that was very important, very easy for me to pick up, something that was enjoyable both in high school and then in college, was the learning of foreign languages. I was someone who picked up German very early, coming in this part of the country. Back in those days, Pennsylvania German, so German was taught in the elementary schools for those who wanted it. So my interest for languages was piqued, and I started to pick up some French classes and some Spanish classes offered by, I'm a product of the Reading School District, who had a wonderful foreign language program. And lo and behold, my life got intertwined with the acquisition of language to the degree that I became a foreign language teacher and spent the first third of my professional career teaching French and Spanish to a few of you out there who are actually on my blog and one of the people following me regularly. And it was a labor of love. I loved it. I have been able to keep up with my language skills throughout the years, as you can see from the opening. So Spain is a place close to my heart. I took 2 trips to Spain as a chaperone with different students, and my wife and some others of you in this group were in Spain with me. So this is kind of, and that was in the late 1970s. 77 was the first trip, and I think 77, 78 was the first one, my very first year of teaching. And then I think there was another one in 1980, maybe, 79. I'd have to go look at my old passport, which I still have. But it was a long time ago. But I've been to Spain twice. I have not, unfortunately, been back since. That is something that I hope to change. So, what I'd like to do tonight, as you can see, I'm surrounded by a bunch of friends to my right and to my left. You see over here a number of gins from Spain, and their wine and gin are very, very important in Spain, and I'm about to take you through a little bit of a review of how all of that is important. So let me talk a little bit about Spain first, just to give you some background. I think it's always important, and one of the things I've been trying to do on these spots now is to try to intertwine wine and spirits with the culture of the country, which includes their geography, their history. I don't mean to turn it into a history class, but I think some short, interesting facts certainly won't hurt. So let's start. Spain itself, you know where it's located. It's considered a peninsula along with Portugal. They call it the Iberian Peninsula. And it is the second most mountainous country in all of Europe, next to Switzerland. Spain is kind of known for, in terms of history, if you're into literature, you've heard of Don Quixote de la Mancha, the old story about Sancho Panza and Don Quixote, written by Cervantes. Famous artists, Goya, Velázquez, Picasso, some unfortunate Salvador Dali. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention him. All Spaniards. And then, of course, from the history, there's the Generalissimo Francisco Franco, who ruled Spain with an iron fist for decades. He is now obviously gone. Spain's part of the EU, and things are a little bit different in Spain. But Spain has a long and varied history, conquered by the Romans, then taken over by the Muslims, and then the Muslims driven out finally by El Cid in the 711. Big La Reconquista de España is what they call it, the reconquest of Spain. So it's a country laden in history, laden in wonderful facts and information, and it's just a very beautiful country to begin with. So tonight, my goal is to try to give you the depth and the, as they say in Spanish, the variedad, the variety of wines and experiences that you will be able to find as you explore Spanish wine and spirits. So let's talk a little bit about the way Spaniards look at grape production. As a former language teacher, there are two words that jumped out at me when I was doing my research. And one of them is elaborar, and the other one is fabricar. And the Spaniards look more at their process of making wine as elaborar, elaborate, create, rather than fabricar, which connotes production and just kind of putting it in a bottle. So the Spaniards take their winemaking very seriously, and I can tell you, dollar for dollar and palate for palate, Spanish wines are probably the best quality price ratio wines that you will get. You don't have to spend a lot for, and you can get some very expensive Spanish wines, of course, but you don't have to spend a lot on a Spanish wine in order to get a really good one. And I have assembled here an array of fantastic Spanish wines. I have quite a few. I didn't really make a count of how many wines I have in my cellar bottle for bottle, but I can tell you the grapes that I have in a minute, and it's quite a list. So those are the things that I think help focus our attention on what we're going to talk about next. So let's move on to the specific wine regions and wine geography, because wine and geography are intertwined, obviously. So there are really seven if you count the islands that are possessions of Spain, but we're going to stick to the 6 main wine regions that are part of the Iberian Peninsula minus Portugal. So there's first of all what is called Green Spain, España Verde, which is in the Basque Country and in the northwest corner of the country, and also contains Galicia, which is where both of the substances, except for the tonic water in this glass, came from. So let's toast that. I would say that's a summer drink, but I'm drinking it now and it's not summer. So, the next area is Catalonia. That is in the northeast corner. Borders France in the north. If you're a map geek and you're familiar with what I'm talking about, think of the city of Barcelona. So that is Catalonia. As they say in Spanish, Catalunya. Then there is the north central part in the center of the country, around the area of the Duero and the Ebro rivers. Then there's your central plateau. As I said, Spain's very mountainous. And then there's your Valencia coast, which if you're imagining Spain, the Mediterranean over here, and the Atlantic over here. Valencia is kind of in the south central portion of the country, or as they say, Valencia. So that's kind of like what is southeast Spain. And then finally, there's southern Spain, which is sherry country. And before we even get to it, I'm going to, as a disclaimer, I'm going to omit any conversation on sherry, because the whole process of making sherry it owns its own segment that I will do the proper research and share with you at some point, because sherry is such an important part of the Spanish wine experience, but it is so unique and so powerful. It's akin to the Champagne region in France. It's very, very Spanish, and it's something that deserves more attention than I can give here in order to try to cover all of Spain. But that region is called Jerez, and that's in the southern part around Seville and other points, Malaga, down in the south of Spain. I'm going to say down in the south of Spain. So if you take those wine regions and then you further break them down, because Spain has similar processes to Italy that has the DOCGs, France that has the AOCs, our country that has the AVAs, all of these wine divisions, they have DOCs, and DOC is Denominación Origen Controlada. So they have these different wine regions in Spain that are designated. And it's important, I'll try to impart a little bit how you can find and how to determine a wine from Spain that is worth your time. But as I said, the cost of Spanish wines is unbelievably, it's fair. They really don't gouge you for wines from Spain. So let's talk about, when you're looking for Spanish wine, what are the main wine regions? And these are the things that you might see on a bottle. So let me point them out to you. First of all, in the northeast part of the country, more over toward Catalonia, not exactly in Catalonia, but not too far from the French border, the Pyrenees, is a region called Rioja. And Rioja wines are famous around the world. And the grape primarily from Rioja is Tempranillo, which I'll talk about in a minute. The next region is Ribera del Duero. So if you listen to that, that's in the Duero River. That's in the Central Plateau. Again, fantastic wines. Tempranillo is a big grape all over Spain. Then there's the Basque region, or the País Vasco, as they call it, which also shares kind of territory with France. And there are some great wines coming out of there. Then there's Bierzo, which is in the area of Galicia, very famous for a red wine called Mencía, which I have here on the table and I'll talk about in a minute. Then you have your Rías Baixas, if you remember from the Albarino presentation. I've already talked about this, but I thought it's important. Then we were only focusing on Albarino. Tonight we're focusing on España, on Spain. So your Albarinos and this Nordestino, this Nordest gin, all of it comes from the País Verde of España in Galicia. Then there is a region called Jumilla, Jumilla, Jumilla. And they are very famous. And I have one on the table here. It's a blend, but probably the best grape that emigrated from that area is Monastrell, Mourvedre, Mataro. It's been called many different things, but it makes the big red wine called Monastrell from Spain, and Jumilla is a center for fantastic Jumilla wine, Monastrell. And finally, in the Central Plateau, an area that produces one of my favorite white wines of all is an area called Rueda. And they make a crisp white wine, very similar in profile, but it's not the same grape to Sauvignon Blanc. It's called Rueda Verdejo. So just by looking at all of that, you can see that, let me move some of these guys around here so you can kind of get a look at them. There's our Rueda. That's a special one that I'm going to talk about in a minute. There's a little bit of Albarino. And I'll leave the red guys over here until we can talk about them in a little bit more detail. So I told you I have a certain number of Spanish wines in my collection. And the grapes that I have are pretty varied. I have cavas, which are in this bottle, which contain 3 grapes. So just listen carefully. You can see how, how much Spanish wine is a part of my wine experience. There are 3 grapes in a cava. And if you remember, I talked about this before as well. There's a grape called Xarel-lo, there's a grape called Macabeo, and a grape called Parellada. And cavas generally hail from Catalonia, the Catalunya region in Spain. There are sparkling wines that are fantastic values. And you could spend money for them, but you really don't have to because they're great at a great price point. So then you have Rueda. And the grape actually is, I should say, I told you I'd talk about the grapes in my collection. I have the Verdejo grape. The Verdejo grape is very important in the production of this one called Rueda. I have Albarino. I have Albarino from Spain. I have Albarino from Pennsylvania. So, and I have actually some Albarino from France. But the best Albarino, without a doubt, sin duda, as they say in Spanish, is from Rias Baixas. And this bottle is one that I'll talk about in a minute. I also have a red grape called Garnacha. For those of you familiar with it, it's called Grenache in France and in the United States. Very important grape in the Rhone Valley, very important grape in Spain, red blends, very important grape in California, red blends, where they're doing a lot of work with Rhone blends as well. I have a grape in my collection called Mencía. And Mencía is similar to a Pinot Noir style of grape. And Mencía comes from the Rias Baixas Galician area in Spain. So it's in the northwest area, but it's a red. It's not a white. It's not this. That's really good. If I could describe to you what's in this glass, imagine a little bit of gin with a little bit of white wine, chilled, a little bit of tonic. It's got because the gin is actually made with the Albarino as well, so it's just got this whole great thing going on. I know I'm usually more specific, but that's what's going on here. It's very refreshing. Very, very refreshing. You could probably, on a nice day, probably have more than one of these because they're kind of watered down a little bit, which is good because they taste so good. Normally what you would do here, sorry to digress here, is you would put a skewer instead of olives, like in a martini. You would put 3 white grapes in here and kind of eat them while you're drinking it. Fantastico. So, those are the main grapes in my Spanish wine collection. You're really not going to see much Spanish Sauvignon Blanc or Spanish Chardonnay or Spanish Pinot Gris. That's not their thing. They do the Rueda, they do the Xarel-lo. They have a grape called Irene, which I have never even tried yet. It's actually the #1 grape in white production in the country. And then there's all the grapes that go into sherry making. So it is a virtual paradise. I failed to mention earlier that Spain is the largest producer, has the most area of its country dedicated to vineyards of anybody on the planet. However, they are 3rd in wine production behind Italy and France due to the low yields that occur due to climate and whatever other reasons. So while they have all this land covered, they do not have as much liquid in barrels, and therefore not as many bottles on the shelves as Italy and France. So that kind of rounds out the wine situation in Spain. We've gone through all of the grapes that you can, not all, but the principal grapes. I'm trying to share with you the great, like Tempranillo is another wine. It's in this wine here. I have Tempranillo grape in the Riojas. There are so many good Spanish wines. Hopefully, I can impart to you when you go into wherever it is you shop for your wine, supermarket, PA Wine and Spirits, Total Wine, you can always ask the guy there. Some of you probably want to do it on your own. I would suggest that you learn how to read a bottle. So what I'm going to do now, what I'll do before that, I want to just also reintroduce because I'm doing wine and gin, because on the side here, this is truly a wine and spirits experience in Spain. So I have behind me, as you saw earlier, this is probably the #1 gin in Spain, according to some of the research I did, called Gin Mare. Fantastic. Martini. It's made here. It's distilled from olives, thyme, rosemary, and basil. Really? What would be bad about that? A martini with a couple olives? What a way to relax. And there's this other one, which I've talked to you about extensively, from Galicia, called Nordes, which means north. It's in this glass tonight, so cheers to that again. And then finally, there are so many gins in Spain. This just happens to be, I bought this one not even knowing it was from Spain. But it is called Akori. And I was thinking, oh, maybe this is from Japan. Well, as it turns out, it is from Barcelona, another Spanish gin. Spain is the #1 per capita consumer of gin on the planet. Spaniards love their gin. Now in the United States, because we're larger and just by sheer volume, we're #1 in gin consumption. But if you break it down per person, Spain, España, número 1 en la consumpción de gin, Ginebra. Cheers. So, I'm not really going to talk more about these. I just wanted to let you know that gin, if we're covering Spain, just like Jerez and sherry is important in Spain, so is gin. And very important in terms of commerce, in terms of licores, and in terms of just general having a good time with stuff in Spain. So, let me take you through, and I know this spot might run a little long, but as I told you, this whole Spanish experience to me has been really an important part of my life, both culturally, obviously financially. It's a way I made money to support my family for a number of years, and I just enjoy the whole idea of Spanish culture. So, we're going to learn a little bit more about that culture through the wines that I want to share with you tonight. So let me first of all begin with the first one. And I always, whenever I'm having a gathering, if you would come to my house and we're having a little bit of a gala, you're going to get sparkling. Always. Either sparkling or a cocktail, so we covered both of them. But for the most part, it's a nice sparkling. So the sparkling that I have for you here is one from Spain, and Spain is famous for a sparkling method called cava. And this one is by Juve y Camps. It's a 2017 Reserva. I'm going to be dead honest with you. I had about 6 of these, down to my last one. I hope I can find it again. If I can't, I'll find another. If you want to find one, go to the PA Wine and Spirits. Segura Viudas is a good one. Freshenet, as much as I laugh at it, very good one. And you can get cavas at a very, very interesting price point. I'm talking like $9, $10. And you'll have a good time. They're not bad. So this one is from Juve y Camps Gran Reserva. And I can tell you, without even looking, that this one is from the Catalunya region of Spain. So go find yourself a cava. So that's the first one. And just remember when I talked about the grapes that are in my array of Spanish wines, in this bottle is Xarel·lo, Xarelo, Parellada, I'm not going to spell all these for you, and Macabeo. So that's what goes into a good cava. No matter what kind you get, it's always going to have that kind of combination. I'll be honest with you, I do not know the percentage of each grape. I just know that, I can be honest with you, I've had some weaker cavas, never had a bad one. So for the most part, they have been a blast. So let's move that aside so we can clear the table here eventually. Put that down here, let it rest. And let's talk next about a white wine that is also a wine that, sorry if you're hearing the tingle tingle, it's just my excitement. So let me talk about this one next. This is a wine, it is called Bohigas Xarel·lo 2020, big X on the bottle. I found this one on Wine Access, I'm not going to lie to you. You really can't get this one. I got so excited when I saw this one. I had never seen a still version of Xarel·lo. Xarel·lo was always a wine that I found and I had to have through cava, so I didn't really have the ability to understand the profile of Xarel·lo. Well, I can tell you something. When this runs out, I am going to search high and low for it. This may be the best white wine find that I have made in 5 years. I can't even remember finding it, and it's not expensive. And it is from Catalunya, from the Barcelona area, and it is 12% ABV. It's dry, it's medium bodied, it's got a profile of apples and tree fruit and a little bit of citrus, a nice acidity, a great, nice, smooth finish. It is just a quintessential, all-around, fantastic wine. Xarel·lo. And if I actually come across this and am able to make it easy for you to find, I'll make sure I put out a post, because this is one wine that I am sure, if I were to poll all of you, there's about 52, 53 of you in this group. And by the way, get the word out to some of your friends. Tell them to join. I'm still looking for more members just to share the experience. But I would dare say that unless you've been to my house to have some of this, you have not had Xarel·lo as a single variety still wine. You should. You don't know what you're missing. And it is something that I hope I can make you find at some point. So we're going to move that one off the table. Let's go next to one of my other favorite white wine grapes, and that is Alvarinho. This is a white wine. Alvarinho, important in Portugal, important in France. It's grown well here in Pennsylvania, believe it or not. A shout out to Maple Springs Winery, and a shout out to what's the other one? The winery, Stony Run Winery in Lehigh County. So this one is from the Rías Baixas, as I said, in the northwest corner of Spain. It's called Val do Sossego. Val do is a Portuguese influence, probably a Galician language. I get this one at Total Wine. It's in here. It's making a great Nordeste. or I should say a great Nordicino. Fantastic, fantastic wine. And if you can't get a Spanish Albarino, then buy one in America. Buy an American, Pennsylvania, Californian, but the best ones are from Spain, hands down. And finally, to close out our white side, I have been drinking this wine for a decade or more. I found it down at Total Wine. Been buying wine a long time, guys. I hope you're starting to get that. This is a Rueda Verdejo, 100% Verdejo from the Rueda region of Spain in the central area of Spain. I've been buying this one so long they changed the label. It used to look like something else. So I can only tell you that this wine it's a perfect sipper. It's perfect with seafood, with chicken. It's crisp. It's clean. It's citrusy. It's got maybe a little bit of stone fruit on it, maybe apricot or peach. Very subtle, and yet at the same time, very, very worth your time. It'll go good. I can never get through a segment without saying this. It goes very good with just a glass. So go find yourself. I didn't even look, I'll be honest with you. I didn't look on the website for PA Wine and Spirits. But if you go in to the PA Wine and Spirits, hopefully they'll have a Rueda Verdejo. If you can find it, buy it. If you can't, search online. Join a club or just order a couple bottles. It's fantastic. Muy bueno. So, let's take a little break here. My excitement's getting to me here about Spain. So, to settle me down, I'm going to close out with, here, in this little interlude between the whites and the reds, let me talk a little bit about food and wine pairing when it comes to Spanish wine. You have all heard, you go to TGI Fridays and you get appetizers and they start calling them tapas. Well, tapas are something that are so inbred into Spain, they're as important part as gin and wine are. So tapas are such a cultural thing in the Spanish culture, and they're pairing with wine and gin and other kinds of liquors that it is just, it's an inbred part of the culture the same way pretzels are inborn into the German culture. So I would recommend to you, and at the end I'll post some ideas for you to find ideal tapas, little cheeses like manchego that comes from Spain, and other tapas that you can have, chorizo, the Spanish sausage. There's nothing like a little cracker, a little chorizo, and a little glass of red wine, maybe a Tempranillo or a Mencía, noshing on that and washing it down with a fantastic Spanish red. My mouth is watering thinking about it. So I'll post a little bit for you about tapas, but I didn't really intend, because I knew this spot was going to run long because I have such an excitement about Spanish wines, that I'll just post some stuff for you about tapas, and then you can read at your heart's content about tapas and wine and pairings that you can have that will suit your palate. So let's now go to Spanish reds. And it's important not to, the whites from Spain are glorious. The reds are double glorious. The reds from Spain, they rival the reds from any other country that produces wine. So let's start with I'm going to start with the lightest one. And this is one, I don't know if you can see it, I broke a bottle. Slipped out of my wine rack, and so this wine is, it's been baptized, given that we just had Easter here. This is a wine called Mencia, Mencia. Admittedly, this wine will not be easy for you to find. This is one that I was unaware of until my wine access feeds keep coming through. Now this one is from Bierzo. Bierzo is in the same area where you get the Albarino that's in this glass in the Rías Baixas Galicia, or as they say again, Galicia area of Spain. This wine is 13% ABV. It is from the Riviera Sacra, the Dominación de Origen, the DO. They call it a DO. So that's the wine region. And this one is a 2017. And it is very similar, very earthy, very smooth tannin, very similar in profile to and weight and complexity as a Pinot Noir. I did one of my wine parties a couple years ago was It's Not Pinot, but it was meant to be a play on words, and it really kind of was like Pinot. And this is one of the wines we featured. It wasn't this bottle specifically, but I found a Mencia, and it's very, very similar. So if you like Pinot Noir, you would love Mencia. So that's our first one, our first red, and we're going to move that one down here with these other soldiers who are quietly resting. And we're going to move now to one of the most important red wine regions in Spain, and that is the wine region of Rioja. And remember earlier we talked about where Rioja is. It's closer to France. When things went bad in Bordeaux, the French, with phylloxera and the other things that infected the France wine industry back in the day, they relied on these Spanish reds, and Tempranillo being one of the grapes. So this is a wine made primarily from Tempranillo. So when you hear Rioja, if you're reading the label and you see a wine, it doesn't say Tempranillo on it and it says Rioja, it's Tempranillo and it's good. Buy it. You don't have to buy an expensive one. This one is this is a 2015 reserve. And this one has a lot of awards listed on the bottom, which I'm not going to bother reading to you. Just take it from me. It's a great wine. And these Tempranillos, it's just a very, very wonderful red wine grape. Dark red fruits, very smooth tannins, a little bit of acid on it, and it is 14.5 ABV, which means this one will make your face warm when you have a couple sips of it. And that, my friends, is a good thing. Esto es bueno. So let's move that one aside. And this one is by Cune, which it stands for Compañía Vinícola del Norte de España. So the U is really a V. Cune. Very, very famous producer, long-term producer of great Spanish reds and some whites as well. So let's move that one aside. So we're getting down there. So now, our next one is a single varietal. And this one, and a grape that does very well in Spain, is Garnacha. In France, called Grenache. And in the United States, we've just borrowed the word. Now, Garnacha comes from Navarra, which is if you remember, we talked earlier about the Valencia coast. So the grape in this bottle is a 2019. It is a 14.5%. And one of the things you're going to see when you read, you've seen me read about Spanish wines on my different spots, and there's not a lot of information. They don't tell you what the wine tastes like. it's very important that you, when you pick up a Spanish wine, you have a little bit of your own background. Now, I can tell you Grenache is a humongous red wine. It's big, it's bold, packs a little tannin. But if you let it sit in the bottle and you aerate it properly, wonderful dark red fruit, nice tannins, wonderful chewy nature, as they call it, to a Garnacha. I've been drinking Spanish Garnachas forever. They are fantastic. So let's set that one aside. And I know we're running a little long here, and my apologies, but I'm not really apologizing. That's still very good. And finally, I want to close out with a wine that is a red Spanish blend. And the reason that I want to close out with it is that it is 85% Monastrell, which is generally from the Jumilla region of Spain. And this is from Yecla, which is in that area that I was talking about in the Valencian coast, where these Monastrells come from. This wine is called La Purissima, and it is a 2016 85% Monastrell, 10% Syrah, and 5% Garnacha. I have had one of these. It's got a 92 points from James Suckling. I know you're not into wine critics, but when James Suckling puts a 92 on a bottle, it's probably pretty good. And this one is better than pretty good. It is absolutely fantastic. I bought a case of this with a couple friends and we split it, so I still have a couple bottles. I have, of course, had one, and it is just the Monastrell, the Mourvedre grape that is in this wine is absolutely to die for. It is everything you would expect from a big red. Nice fruit, firm tannins. It actually, if I could be honest with you, it's a 2016. This one could probably go 2 or 3 more years before it hits its peak. But it's ready now. You just put it in a decanter and let it hit its peak in the decanter. So that, my friends, is Spain. Mis amigos. The wines and the gins of Spain are something that you should no longer deny yourself. So as we say adios to this presentation, por favor, go out and find yourself some good Spanish wines. Reds, whites. I didn't even do rosés because there are just, this presentation's already taking almost 45 minutes. I could have, if I would have added sherry and the Spanish rosés to this presentation, you would have been falling asleep by the end of this. So, without further ado, as they say in Spain, hasta la próxima. Until we see each other again, cheers. Or as they say in Spanish, salud.